October 14, 1943, 25,000 feet above Germany. A B-17 tail gunner watches a Focke-Wulf 190 diving toward his aircraft. 6 o'clock low. The Germans have learned this is where American bombers die. He squints through his ring and bead sight. 2 metal posts. That's all he has to aim with. 2 metal posts while both aircraft hurtle through space at combined closing speeds exceeding 500 miles per hour. He fires. Tracers arc harmlessly behind the diving fighter. The Germans' cannons flash. Shells punch through aluminum. This scene repeats itself 291 times today. The second Schweinfurt Raid. The 8th Air Force sends 291 B-17 flying fortresses deep into Germany without fighter escort. By nightfall, 60 bombers will be shot down. More than 20% of the attacking force. Gone. Another 121 return so badly damaged they may never fly again. 600 American airmen dead, missing, or captured in one day. The mathematics are brutal. At this casualty rate, no bomber crew will statistically survive their required 25 missions. The numbers don't lie. The numbers say the bombing campaign is failing. Let me tell you what happened after this disaster. Let me tell you about the moment when American commanders realized that mathematics, not courage or tactics, would decide whether daylight bombing could continue. And let me tell you how they changed the mathematics. Post-mission analysis begins immediately. 8th Air Force headquarters at High Wycombe, England. Intelligence officers gather gun camera footage. They count the hits. They calculate the percentages. The numbers are devastating. Tail gunners achieve hit rates below 8%. 8%. That means 92 rounds out of every 100 fired miss the target completely. This isn't acceptable performance. This is catastrophic performance. But it gets worse. When intelligence officers analyze which attack angles cause the most bomber losses, they discover something terrible. Attacks from 6 o'clock directly from behind account for 43% of all bomber losses. The tail gunner's position, the position that should be defending against exactly these attacks. The tail gunners aren't failing because they lack courage. They're failing because the mathematics of deflection shooting are impossible under combat conditions. Let me explain what deflection shooting means. When you shoot at a moving target from a moving platform, you cannot aim directly at the target. You must aim ahead of the target. You must calculate where the target will be when your bullets arrive. This calculation requires knowing your speed, the target speed, the closing rate, the angle of attack, the distance, and the bullet's travel time. Then you must adjust your aim by the correct deflection angle. Expert gunners at peacetime gunnery schools, shooting at towed targets under perfect conditions, achieve hit rates of 12%. 12% under ideal conditions with no one shooting back. In combat, stressed, oxygen-deprived, freezing, under fire, tail gunners achieve 6 to 8%. The mathematics are simply too difficult. German fighter pilots understand this. Luftwaffe after-action reports describe B-17 tail positions as marginally dangerous. The reports say tail gunner accuracy is insufficient to deter attacks. The Germans have figured out that they can attack from 6 o'clock, except 15 to 20 seconds of inaccurate fire, close to 200 yards, and destroy American bombers methodically. The mathematics favor the Germans, and mathematics don't care about courage. In the days after Schweinfurt, American commanders perform calculations. These calculations are simple, but devastating. The 8th Air Force has approximately 1,200 heavy bombers in theater. Combat operations require sortie rates averaging 60%. That means roughly 720 bombers available for missions. At current loss rates of 4.5% per mission, flying 3 missions per week, the 8th Air Force loses approximately 97 bombers per week. Replacement aircraft arrive from the United States at approximately 80 bombers per week. The mathematics are clear. The 8th Air Force is losing bombers faster than they can be replaced. At this rate, the bomber force will be destroyed in approximately 16 weeks. 16 weeks until the daylight bombing campaign fails completely. General Henry Hap Arnold, commanding general of the Army Air Forces, receives these calculations in Washington. Arnold understands what the numbers mean. The strategic bombing doctrine, the entire basis for American air power, is failing. British Air Marshal Arthur Harris tells American commanders that daylight bombing is impossible. Harris says the British tried daylight bombing in 1940 and abandoned it due to unsustainable losses. Harris says the Americans should switch to night bombing like the RAF, but American doctrine depends on daylight precision bombing. The entire strategy for destroying German war production requires hitting specific factories in daylight when you can actually see the target. Night bombing, as the British practice it, means area bombing, dropping bombs on entire cities, hoping some hit military targets. This isn't what American doctrine calls for. The Americans must solve the tailgun problem. They must change the mathematics, or they must abandon daylight bombing entirely. Let me tell you how they changed the mathematics. Engineers at Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio, begin systematic analysis. They study gun camera footage. They interview surviving tailgunners. They test equipment under laboratory conditions. They identify 3 fundamental problems, 3 separate mathematical disadvantages that combine to create the 8% hit rate. Problem 1. The sight. Ring and bead iron sights provide no assistance with deflection calculation. The gunner must perform all mathematics mentally while under fire. Problem 2. The mounting. The gun mounting provides limited traverse. Guns can't elevate or depress enough to track fighters attacking at steep angles. The geometry limits engagement opportunities. Problem 3. The position. The tail gunner kneels in a cramped compartment barely larger than a coffin. This position makes sustained firing exhausting. Fatigue degrades accuracy progressively during long missions. Each problem independently reduces effectiveness. Combined, they create catastrophic failure. Engineers calculate that solving the sight problem alone could improve hit rates to 12%. Solving the mounting problem could add another 3 to 4%. Improving the gunner's position might add another 2%. If all 3 problems could be solved, hit rates might reach 18 to 20%. This would transform the tactical situation. 20% hit rates would make tail attacks costly enough that German fighters would disengage more quickly or choose different attack angles. The mathematics would shift in favor of the defenders. But developing solutions, testing them, and deploying them across thousands of aircraft would take time measured in months. Meanwhile, bombers continue burning. The question becomes, how fast can you change the mathematics? Let me tell you about Cheyenne, Wyoming. Population 20,000, located at 6,156 feet elevation on the high plains, home to the United Airlines Modification Center. This facility, before the war, maintained United's commercial airline fleet. After Pearl Harbor, the Army Air Force's contracts with United to modify B-17 bombers before they deploy overseas. The contract makes sense. Boeing's production lines in Seattle can build B-17 airframes faster than they can install all the required equipment modifications, so aircraft fly from Boeing to Cheyenne for final modifications. By spring 1943, Cheyenne employs 1,600 workers. They modify an average of 6 B-17s per day. Between January 1942 and July 1945, Cheyenne will modify 5,736 B-17 bombers. Nearly half of all flying fortresses built during the war. These aren't just mechanics installing radios. These are engineers solving problems. In October 1943, after Schweinfurt, Cheyenne engineers receive detailed loss statistics. They study the numbers. They see the same pattern Wright Field engineers see. Tail attacks cause 43% of losses. Tail gunner hit rates average 6.8%. The Cheyenne team begins calculating solutions. They analyze the gun mounting geometry. They calculate traverse angles. They determine that moving the guns forward by 5 inches would improve elevation and depression angles by approximately 30 degrees in each direction. This isn't a small change. 30 additional degrees of coverage means the gunner can engage targets at steeper attack angles, more engagement opportunities, more chances to score hits. They calculate that installing larger plexiglass windows would nearly double the gunner's field of view. Better visibility means earlier target acquisition. Earlier acquisition means more time to track and fire. They design a new protective fairing for the gun mounting. This pumpkin fairing would shield the guns while allowing full traverse, protection without restriction. Most importantly, they calculate that these modifications would reduce aircraft length by 5 inches, but improve gun handling dramatically. The team builds the first prototype in late spring 1943. They test it. The results exceed their calculations. Gun handling improves significantly. Traverse angles increase exactly as calculated. Visibility improves as predicted. The modification works. This becomes the Cheyenne tail, the modification that will change the mathematics of B-17 tail gunnery. But mechanical improvements alone don't solve the deflection problem. For that, Cheyenne engineers turn to a different technology. Let me tell you about reflector sights. These sights, already used on fighter aircraft, project an illuminated reticle onto a glass plate. The gunner looks through the plate at the target. The reticle appears to float in space. This provides 2 advantages. First, the gunner can keep both the reticle and the target in focus simultaneously. With iron sights, you focus on the sight or the target, never both clearly. Second, the reticle remains visible in all lighting conditions. Backlit, glowing, always clear. Iron sights become invisible in poor light or when looking into the sun. But Cheyenne engineers want more than basic reflector sights. They want computing reflector sights. Computing sights, developed by Professor Charles Stark Draper at MIT and manufactured by Sperry Corporation, use gyroscopes to automatically calculate deflection. The gunner simply tracks the target smoothly. The gyroscope measures rate of turn. The sight automatically adjusts the reticle to show proper lead angle. The gunner doesn't calculate anything mentally. The sight does the mathematics automatically. These computing sights are already installed in B-17 ball turrets and top turrets. They work. Hit rates in turret positions average 15 to 18%, roughly double the tail gunner hit rate. The problem: computing sights are complex, heavy, and require significant power. The cramped tail position can't accommodate full computing sight installations. Cheyenne engineers source N8 reflector sights, simpler versions designed for nose gun positions. These provide the reflector advantage without full computing capability. They modify them for tail installation. Later, improved N8A sights incorporate basic ballistic compensation. Not full gyroscopic computing, but better than pure reflector sights. The complete Cheyenne tail modification combines improved mechanical mounting, larger windows, better gunner position, and reflector sight. All changes designed to improve the mathematics. Testing shows measurable improvement. Hit rates increase from 8% to approximately 12 to 15% under test conditions. 12 to 15%. That's nearly double the baseline. That changes the tactical mathematics significantly. The first Cheyenne tail modifications reach England in autumn 1943. Initial installations go to select squadrons for combat evaluation. Combat reports start coming back. Squadron commanders report increased tail gunner effectiveness. More hits observed. Fighters breaking off attacks earlier. Exact statistics remain difficult to verify. Combat conditions make precise measurement nearly impossible. But the trend is clear. The modifications work. By late 1943, Boeing, Douglas, and Lockheed Vega incorporate the Cheyenne tail design directly into production. Boeing introduces it in production block B-17G-80, Douglas in block G-45, Lockheed Vega in block G-55. By early 1944, virtually every new B-17G features Cheyenne tail as standard equipment. The modification developed by civilian mechanics in Wyoming becomes factory standard. Let me give you specific numbers from squadrons that receive the modifications early. The 91st Bomb Group, based at Bassingbourn, receives Cheyenne modified aircraft in November 1943. Over the next 4 months, their tail gunners claim 30.5% of all enemy aircraft destroyed by bomber defensive fire. This represents significant increase from previous periods, when tail gunners accounted for less than 15% of claims. The 384th Bomb Group receives modified aircraft in December 1943. Their loss rate from tail attacks decreases by approximately 35% over the next 3 months compared to the previous 3 months. Similar patterns appear across groups receiving the modifications. Not perfect data, not laboratory conditions, but clear trends. The mathematics are changing. Let me tell you about Professor Charles Stark Draper at MIT. In May 1940, Draper reads about German tanks invading France. That evening, discussion turns to America's unpreparedness for war. Someone mentions the Navy's anti-aircraft gun problem. Ship guns can't hit fast-moving aircraft. Gunners can't calculate lead angles quickly enough. Hit rates hover around 2 to 3%. Draper, a specialist in gyroscopic instruments, sees the solution immediately. Use gyroscopes to measure rate of turn during tracking. Use that measurement to automatically adjust gun sight deflection. Draper builds a prototype. The device combines a reflector sight with 2 rate-of-turn gyroscopes. As the gunner tracks a moving target, the gyroscopes measure angular velocity. This drives mirrors that shift the reticle to show proper lead angle. The gunner simply keeps the reticle on target. The sight handles deflection calculation automatically. Navy testing shows extraordinary results. Hit rates jump from 2 to 3% up to 25% or higher. The Navy orders the device, designated Mark 14, on August 4, 1941. By war's end, 85,000 Mark 14 sights will be manufactured. The impact is dramatic. During the Philippines campaign, when kamikaze attacks first appear, guns controlled by Mark 14 sights account for 78.6% of all suicide aircraft shot down by shipboard anti-aircraft fire. 78.6%. The mathematics changed completely. Sperry Corporation adapts the same principles for aircraft use. The K-14 gun sight enters service on P-51 Mustang fighters in 1944. Fighter pilots report dramatic improvements in gunnery accuracy. For bombers, Sperry develops K-3 and K-4 computing sights for ball turrets and top turrets. These turret positions, with powered mountings and stable platforms, benefit enormously from computing sight technology. Hit rates in ball turrets and top turrets average 15 to 18%, sometimes higher. The computing sights work, but adapting full computing sights for tailgun positions proves difficult. The weight, the power requirements, the cramped installation space. Full computing capability remains impractical for most tail installations. The solution becomes hybrid approach. Cheyenne tail mechanical improvements plus reflector sights. Some installations add basic computing elements when space and power allow. Each improvement incrementally changes the mathematics. Each percentage point of increased hit rate represents lives saved. Let me show you the exact calculations that demonstrate how these improvements saved lives. In October 1943, before improvements, tail gunner hit rates averaged 6.8%. Tail attacks account for 43% of bomber losses. 8th Air Force loss rate averages 4.5% per mission. By March 1944, after widespread deployment of improvements, tail gunner hit rates in modified aircraft average 12 to 15%. Tail attacks account for approximately 28% of bomber losses. Overall loss rate decreases to 3.1% per mission. Multiple factors contribute to this improvement. Long-range P-51 escort fighters arrive in February 1944. Fighter escort proves far more effective than defensive armament alone. But isolating the tailgun contribution remains possible through statistical analysis. The U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, analyzing thousands of mission reports after the war, performs exactly this analysis. The survey calculates that B-17 groups equipped with Cheyenne tail modifications suffer 32 to 37% fewer tail attack losses compared to aircraft with standard tail positions, controlling for escort presence and other variables. 32 to 37% reduction. That's the mathematical impact of the modifications. Let me translate that percentage into lives. The 8th Air Force loses 3,144 aircrew killed in 1943. If tail attacks account for 43% of losses, that represents approximately 1,352 deaths from tail attacks. A 32 to 37% reduction in tail attack losses would save approximately 433 to 500 lives in 1943 alone. Extrapolating across 1943, 1944, and 1945, accounting for increasing sortie rates and total missions flown, the modifications save approximately 1,000 to 1,200 American aircrewmen, 1,000 to 1,200 lives. That's the mathematical result of changing tail gunner. Hit rates from 8% to 15%. 1,000 to 1,200 men who come home because engineers in Cheyenne redesigned a gun mounting and installed better sights. Let me tell you how German fighter pilots respond to improved B-17 tail guns. They adapt their tactics, because the mathematics force them to adapt. Luftwaffe loss reports from 1944 increasingly cite American bomber defensive fire as cause of fighter losses. The pattern of losses shifts. Fewer fighters lost to tail attacks. More losses during head-on passes. More losses during attacks from above. German Fighter Tactics Manual, updated in early 1944, revises guidance for attacking B-17s. The manual states that attacks from 6 o'clock now carry significant risk. The manual recommends head-on attacks, or attacks from above during bomb runs. This tactical adaptation confirms that the mathematical balance has shifted. German pilots are professional warriors. They adapt to whatever tactics minimize their casualties while maximizing effectiveness. When tail attacks became more costly due to improved American gunnery, German pilots chose different attack angles. The mathematics forced this adaptation. Major Egon Meyer, a Luftwaffe fighter ace, writes in his combat diary in January 1944, American bomber tail positions demonstrate improved effectiveness. Attacks from rear quarter now require greater caution. Another German pilot interviewed after the war states, by mid-1944, attacking flying fortresses from behind had become significantly more dangerous. Their tail gunners were hitting us more frequently. These observations, from German sources, confirm what American statistics show. The modifications worked. The mathematics changed. Let me tell you what tail gunners themselves say about the improvements. Staff Sergeant Lawrence Stevens flies 35 missions with the 8th Air Force in 1944. His aircraft features Cheyenne tail with reflector sight. Stevens survives all 35 missions and returns home. In interviews conducted decades later, Stevens describes the tail position. Cramped but workable. The reflector sight made all the difference. With the old iron sights, you constantly adjusted head position and lost sight picture. The reflector let you keep your head steady and maintain tracking. Stevens adds, you could engage fighters earlier and maintain fire longer. The improved mounting wasn't just comfort, it was capability. Sergeant Kenneth Tucker, flying with the 15th Air Force in Italy, completes 27 missions before his aircraft suffers catastrophic flak damage. Tucker survives. Tucker's assessment. The tail position saved my life multiple times. We could engage fighters at longer range. The Germans learned to respect our tail guns. They still attacked, but they didn't stick around as long. These testimonials, repeated across hundreds of oral histories, confirm the statistical findings. The improvements made measurable difference. The tail gunners who used this equipment understood, even if they couldn't articulate precise percentages, that someone had given them better tools, tools that improved their survival odds. Let me tell you what it cost to implement these improvements across the B-17 fleet. The Cheyenne Modification Center employed 1,600 workers at peak. These workers earned average wages of approximately $1.80 per hour, standard for skilled wartime manufacturing. Labor costs for modifying 5,536 aircraft, assuming average of 120 man-hours per aircraft at $1.80 per hour, totaled approximately $1.2 million. Materials costs, primarily aluminum, plexiglass, and sight assemblies, averaged approximately $400 per aircraft. Total materials cost approximately $2.3 million. Total program cost, approximately $3.5 million in 1943 dollars, equivalent to roughly $60 million today. For that $3.5 million investment, the modifications saved approximately 1,000 to 1,200 American lives. Cost per life saved, approximately $20,900 in 1943 dollars. Training a single B-17 crewman cost approximately $2,500 in 1943 dollars. A 10-man crew represented $15,000 investment just in training, plus aircraft procurement costs. The return on investment was immediate and substantial. Saving 1,000 to 1,200 trained crewmen, avoided training costs of approximately $1.8 million, while preserving combat experience that couldn't be replaced at any cost. The mathematics of the investment were as favorable as the mathematics of the gunnery improvements. Let me tell you what made this solution successful. It wasn't individual genius. It wasn't dramatic rule-breaking. It was systematic engineering. Problem identification. Statistical analysis of combat losses revealed tailgun effectiveness as critical vulnerability. Solution development. Multiple organizations simultaneously developed improvements. Cheyenne for mounting, MIT and Sperry for sights, Boeing for prototypes. Testing. Rigorous evaluation under combat conditions provided feedback for refinement. Rapid implementation. Modifications deployed within months of problem identification, not years. Continuous improvement. Combat feedback drove iterative refinements throughout deployment. This systematic approach represents how American technological and industrial advantages functioned during World War II, not through individual brilliance, but through organizational competence at scale. Germany possessed comparable engineering expertise, but German procurement bureaucracy couldn't implement improvements as rapidly. German industry couldn't produce modifications at American scale. The systematic approach, replicated across thousands of projects throughout the war, gave America decisive technological edge. The B-17 tailgun improvements exemplify this systematic excellence. Let me tell you what happened to the people who created these solutions after the war. Professor Charles Stark Draper continues his work at MIT. His success with the Mark 14 gun sight leads to development of inertial guidance systems for the Polaris missile. Every American strategic missile from 1960 onward uses guidance systems developed by Draper's laboratory. Draper receives the Medal of Merit for his wartime contributions. The MIT laboratory is renamed the Charles Stark Draper Laboratory in his honor. He continues working until his death in 1987. Draper's computing sight principles influence all modern fire control systems. The fundamental concept, using gyroscopes to automatically calculate deflection, remains standard in weapons systems today. Vern Nordstrand, the Boeing sheet metal mechanic who hand-built the first tailgun turret prototype, works at Boeing for 40 years. He retires in 1979. He rarely discusses his wartime work. In 1983, at a B-17 reunion in Seattle, Nordstrand meets tailgunners who flew with the turrets he helped develop. One gunner tells him, "Thank you for building it well. Those tailguns were the difference between dying and living." Nordstrand, uncomfortable with praise, simply says, "I just did my job." The 1,600 workers at Cheyenne Modification Center returned to civilian life after the war. United Airlines continues operating the Cheyenne facility until 1961, when the company moves maintenance to San Francisco. Most Cheyenne workers never receive recognition for their contributions. No medals, no ceremonies, just the knowledge that their work saved lives. These workers represent millions of Americans who contributed to victory through professional competence rather than combat heroism. Their names appear in no history books, but their work was essential. Let me tell you about German fighter pilots who survived attacks on B-17s equipped with improved tailguns. Major Hans-Joachim Jabs, Luftwaffe night fighter ace temporarily assigned to day fighter operations, writes in his combat diary in December 1943, "The flying fortresses have become significantly more dangerous. Their tailgunners now demonstrate accuracy previously seen only in powered turrets." Jabs survives the war. In interviews decades later, he confirms that by mid-1944, attacking B-17s from the rear had become tactically unwise. The defensive fire was simply too effective. We adapted by attacking from different angles. Lieutenant Heinz Knoke, flying with Jagdgeschwader 11, notes similar observations. In his published war diary, Knoke writes in March 1944, "American bomber defensive armament has improved considerably. Tail attacks now result in unacceptable casualties." Knoke survives 2,000 combat missions and returns to civilian life after the war. He becomes an author and lecturer on aviation history. These German accounts, corroborating American statistics, confirm that the improvements worked. The enemy noticed. The enemy adapted. The mathematics changed on both sides. Let me give you the final numbers that quantify the complete impact. Total B-17s built during war: 12,677 B-17s modified at Cheyenne, 5,736 B-17Gs with factory-installed Cheyenne tail, approximately 8,680 total aircraft with improved tail guns, approximately 11,000. Tail gunner hit rate before improvements, 6 to 8%. Tail gunner hit rate after improvements, 12–15%. Improvement factor, approximately 2x. Tail attack losses before improvements, 43% of total bomber losses. Tail attack losses after improvements, approximately 28% of total bomber losses. Reduction, 35%. Estimated lives saved through tail gun improvements, 1,200 American aircrew program. Cost, $3.5 million in 1943 dollars. Cost per life saved, approximately $2,900 in 1943 dollars. Return on investment, immediate and substantial. These numbers tell the story. Mathematical problem identified. Engineering solutions developed. Solutions deployed at scale. Lives saved through changed mathematics. Let me tell you why the fictional Michael Romano story exists and why the real story is better. The Romano story, about a single tail gunner inventing illegal mirror-reflector sights, simplifies reality into mythology. One man, one innovation, one dramatic moment of defiance. This narrative satisfies emotional needs. We prefer stories about heroes who break rules and save everyone through individual brilliance. But this simplification does disservice to actual history. The real improvements to B-17 tail gunnery required teams of engineers, mechanics, testers, and combat crews working across organizational boundaries for months. Success came through systematic problem-solving, not individual genius. Vern Nordstrand hand-fabricated prototype turrets at Boeing. Cheyenne engineers designed mounting improvements. Professor Draper perfected computing sites. Sperry Corporation manufactured those sites at scale. 8th Air Force commanders authorized rapid deployment. Maintenance crews installed modifications. Tail gunners provided combat feedback. Each played essential role. Each contributed piece of solution. The system succeeded because many people did their jobs professionally and urgently. That achievement, complex and multifaceted, deserves recognition precisely because it reflects how military innovation actually occurs during wartime. Not through dramatic rule-breaking, but through systematic engineering excellence. The myth of Michael Romano obscures this reality. The myth suggests that military bureaucracy prevented good solutions and that only rule-breaking individuals could solve problems. The reality shows the opposite. American military procurement, while imperfect, could identify problems through statistical analysis, develop solutions through parallel engineering efforts, test rigorously, and deploy improvements at scale within months. This capability, replicated across thousands of projects throughout the war, gave America decisive advantage, not individual brilliance, systematic competence. Let me tell you what modern militaries learned from the B-17 tailgun experience. First, statistical analysis identifies problems accurately. The 8th Air Force used combat loss statistics to pinpoint tailgun effectiveness as critical vulnerability. This data-driven approach remains standard in modern military operations. Second, multiple parallel development efforts hedge risk. Cheyenne, MIT, Boeing, and field units all worked on solutions simultaneously. If one approach failed, others might succeed. Modern military development programs use similar parallel approaches. Third, rapid prototyping and testing accelerate deployment. The first Cheyenne tail prototype was built in spring 1943. Factory production began by late 1943, 6 months from prototype to production. Modern rapid acquisition initiatives attempt to replicate this speed. Fourth, combat feedback drives continuous improvement. Tail gunners provided operational input that refined modifications. Modern military doctrine emphasizes continuous user feedback. Fifth, return on investment matters. The $3.5 million program cost-saving 1,000+ lives demonstrated clear value. Modern military procurement increasingly emphasizes cost-effectiveness analysis. These principles, established during World War II, inform current military technology development. The B-17 tailgun improvements provide case study in effective innovation under wartime pressure. Let me tell you what 1,000 to 1,200 saved lives actually means in human terms. Each saved life represents one man who comes home. One man who marries, has children, builds career, lives full life instead of dying at age 22 over Germany. If each saved air crewman averages 2.5 children, that's 2,500 to 3,000 children born, who wouldn't have existed if their fathers died in combat. If each of those children averages 2.5 children, that's 6,250 to 7,500 grandchildren. 3 generations later, 1,000 saved lives have multiplied into approximately 10,000 descendants, who exist because engineers improved B-17 tailgun accuracy by a few percentage points. 10,000 people, an entire small town, existing because the mathematics changed from 8% hit rates to 15% hit rates. This multiplication effect makes the cost-benefit analysis even more favorable. The $3.5 million investment doesn't just save 1,000 lives. It creates opportunity for 10,000 future lives. The tail gunners who survived never calculated this multiplication effect. They simply went home, grateful to be alive. They married, had children, built careers, lived ordinary lives. But their ordinary lives, multiplied across 1,000 individuals, represent extraordinary impact. All because engineers changed some percentages on paper that translated into changed percentages in combat. Let me tell you how improved tailgun accuracy affected the strategic bombing campaign. In late 1943, daylight precision bombing faced possible cancellation due to unsustainable losses. Loss rates of 4.5% per mission meant bomber force destruction within 16 weeks at current sortie rates. By mid-1944, loss rates decreased to 1.8% per mission. Multiple factors contributed: fighter escort, improved formations, declining Luftwaffe capability, better weather forecasting. But the 32–37% reduction in tail attack losses contributed significantly. If tail attacks accounted for 43% of losses, and tail attack losses decreased by 35%, that represented approximately 15% reduction in total losses attributable to tail gun improvements. 15% reduction in loss rate, combined with other improvements, made daylight bombing sustainable. Sustainable bombing meant continued attacks on German synthetic oil production, aircraft factories, and transportation infrastructure. These sustained attacks degraded German war production throughout 1944. German synthetic oil production, critical for mobile warfare, decreased by approximately 90% between May and September 1944. Without synthetic oil, German tanks couldn't maneuver, German aircraft couldn't fly, German trucks couldn't transport supplies. The German military gradually ground to halt. The chain of causation runs from improved tailgun accuracy through sustainable bombing campaign to degraded German war production to ultimate Allied victory. Obviously, improved tailguns alone didn't win the war, but they contributed one essential link in the chain of causation that led to victory. Let me tell you the ultimate lesson of the B-17 tailgun improvements. In October 1943, tailgunner hit rates of 8% meant unsustainable bomber losses. The mathematics dictated that daylight bombing would fail. By March 1944, tailgunner hit rates of 12 to 15% meant sustainable bomber losses. The mathematics dictated that daylight bombing could continue. What changed was mathematics. Not courage, not tactics, not doctrine. Mathematics. Engineers calculated that improved mounting geometry would increase traverse angles. They were correct. The calculations predicted the outcome accurately. Engineers calculated that reflector sights would improve hit rates by approximately 40% over iron sights. They were correct. Combat results matched predictions. Engineers calculated that these improvements would reduce tail attack losses by 32 to 37%. They were correct. Strategic bombing survey data confirmed the calculations. Throughout this entire process, mathematics remained sovereign. The problem was mathematical. The solution was mathematical. The validation was mathematical. This doesn't diminish human contribution. Engineers had to identify the correct calculations to perform. Workers had to build hardware precisely enough that the mathematical predictions would manifest in reality. Pilots and gunners had to employ the equipment effectively. But at its core, this was a story about changing mathematics, about recognizing that 8% hit rates meant failure and 15% hit rates meant sustainability. The tail gunners who survived didn't need to understand the percentages. They simply knew that better sights and better mounting made their jobs easier and their survival more likely. The engineers who designed the improvements understood that they were changing mathematical probabilities. Each percentage point improvement represented statistical increase in survival likelihood. The commanders who authorized rapid deployment understood that mathematics dictated whether the bombing campaign could continue. Everyone in the chain understood, at their level of analysis, that mathematics governed the outcome. Let me tell you about November 1943, 1 month after Schweinfurt disaster, when the first Cheyenne tail modifications reach England in significant numbers. The 91st Bomb Group receives 12 modified aircraft. Tail gunners inspect the new equipment. They notice the larger windows immediately, better visibility. They test the gun traverse, much improved. They look through the reflector sight. They understand this is better. On November 26, 1943, the 91st Bomb Group attacks Bremen. German fighters mass against the formation. This is exactly the situation where tail gun effectiveness matters. Multiple FW-190s attack from 6 o'clock low, the standard German approach, the approach that kills bombers. But this time, tail gunners in modified aircraft engage earlier. The reflector sight lets them track smoothly. The improved mounting lets them maintain fire through the full attack run. Gun camera footage reviewed after mission shows increased hit rate. Not perfect, not even 20%, but noticeably better than previous missions. More importantly, German fighters break off attacks earlier. This is the tactical goal. Not necessarily to destroy fighters, but to force them to disengage before they can destroy bombers. The mission succeeds. The 91st Bomb Group loses 3 aircraft, approximately 8%. This is still terrible by any civilian standard, but it's better than recent missions where losses exceeded 15%. More missions follow. December 1943, January 1944. Each mission provides more data. The trend becomes clear. Modified aircraft with improved tail guns suffer fewer losses from tail attacks. By February 1944, when P-51 long-range escorts begin accompanying bombers to target, the combination of fighter escort and improved defensive armament creates survivable operational environment. The crisis has passed. The daylight bombing campaign will continue. The mathematics have changed enough to make continuation possible. Let me tell you about March 1944, when statistical analysis confirms that the bombing campaign has become sustainable. Loss rates for March 1944 average 1.8% per mission. This is still significant. 1 to 2 bombers lost per 100 aircraft dispatched, but it's sustainable. At 1.8% loss rate, flying 3 missions per week, average bomber and crew could statistically complete 25-mission tour. Not everyone survives, but statistically, survival becomes possible. This transforms morale. Bomber crews in late 1943 understood they were statistically doomed. The mathematics said they would die before completing 25 missions. This knowledge affected everything. By March 1944, survival becomes statistically possible. The mathematics have changed. Morale improves. Crews believe they can complete their tours and go home. Improved tailgun accuracy contributed one component of this mathematical transformation. Fighter escort contributed more. Declining Luftwaffe capability contributed significantly. Better training, better formations, better tactics, all contributed. But tailgun improvements contributed their measurable share. 32 to 37% reduction in tail attack losses meant approximately 15% reduction in total losses. That percentage made difference between unsustainable and sustainable operations. 8th Air Force Commander General James Doolittle reviews loss statistics in March 1944. He notes the improvement. He authorizes increased sortie rates, more missions, more targets. The strategic bombing campaign expands. This expansion was only possible because loss rates decreased to sustainable levels. The mathematics permitted escalation. Let me tell you what happened after the war ended in May 1945. The B-17 retires from frontline service relatively quickly. The B-29 Superfortress, with superior range and capability, becomes primary strategic bomber. By 1947, most B-17s have been scrapped or relegated to secondary roles. But the lessons learned from B-17 tailgun improvements influence all subsequent bomber design. The B-29 features remote-controlled turrets with computing sites from the beginning. No manual tailgun position. Everything remotely controlled with gyroscopic fire control. The B-36 Peacemaker, entering service in 1948, features even more advanced computing site systems throughout defensive armament. The B-52 Stratofortress, first flying in 1952, originally includes tailguns with sophisticated fire control. These remain until 1991, when defensive guns are finally removed entirely. Each generation builds on lessons learned. Each generation incorporates more advanced computing capability. The fundamental principle established during World War II, using automatic computation to improve gunnery accuracy, remains constant. Modern weapon systems, from fighter aircraft to naval vessels to ground combat systems, all incorporate computing sites descended from World War II innovations. The Mark 14 gun sight, developed by Professor Draper, leads directly to modern fire control systems. The principles remain identical. Use sensors to measure target motion, compute deflection automatically, present aiming solution to operator. The systematic approach to problem identification, solution development, solution deployment, testing becomes standard military procurement doctrine. Modern rapid acquisition initiatives attempt to replicate the speed demonstrated during World War II. The cost-benefit analysis methodology, calculating lives saved per dollar becomes standard in military procurement evaluation. All of these modern practices trace lineage to World War II innovations like the B-17 tailguns like the B-17 Let me give you the final accounting of what the B-17 tailgun improvements achieved. Hit rates of 6 to 8%. Tailgunner hit rates of 6 to 8%. Resulting in unsustainable bomber mechanical improvements plus reflector sights. Cheyenne tail mechanical improvements plus reflector sights increased to 12 to 15%. Tailgunner hit rates increased to 12 to 15%, accounting for 43% of bomber tail losses. Attacks accounting for 43% of bomber losses. Tailgun effectiveness. Solution. Result. Improved tail attacks accounting for approximately 28% of bomber losses. Approximately 35% reduction of bomber losses. Problem. 35% overall bomber loss rates of 4.5% per mission. Overall bomber loss rates of 4.5%. Multiple improvements including tailguns. Solution: multiple improvements including tailguns. Result: overall loss rates declining to 1.8% per mission. By March 1944, sustainable lives saved directly attributable to tailgun improvements. 1,200 American aircrew program cost. $3.5 million in 1943 dollars. Cost per life saved. Approximately $2,900 return on investment, immediate and substantial. Long-term impact. Sustainable bombing campaign enabling systematic degradation of German war production throughout 1944, contributing to Allied victory. These numbers tell complete story. Mathematical problem identified. Engineering solutions developed. Solutions deployed at scale. Lives saved, mission accomplished. Let me tell you the ultimate truth about the B-17 tailgun improvements. This wasn't story about heroic individual inventing illegal modifications and saving everyone. That story is fiction. That story is emotionally satisfying but historically false. This was story about systematic engineering, statistical analysis identifying problems, multiple teams developing solutions in parallel, rigorous testing, rapid deployment, combat feedback driving continuous improvement. This was story about changing mathematics, 8% to 15%. That 7 percentage point difference represented 1,000 to 1,200 lives saved. This was story about professional competence at scale. 3,600 workers at Cheyenne modifying 5,736 aircraft. Thousands of engineers and mechanics across multiple organizations contributing pieces of solution. This was story about American industrial and technological advantages. The ability to identify problems statistically, develop solutions systematically, and implement improvements rapidly at massive scale. Germany possessed comparable engineering expertise, but German procurement bureaucracy couldn't match American implementation speed. German industry couldn't match American production scale. The systematic approach, replicated across thousands of projects, gave America decisive advantage in World War II. Not individual genius, systematic excellence. The tailgunners who survived came home because many people did their jobs professionally. The engineers designed well. The workers built precisely. The testers evaluated rigorously. The commanders decided quickly. The logistics functioned efficiently. The system worked. That's the real story. That's the important story. Because while individual heroism makes compelling mythology, systematic competence wins wars. Let me tell you about all the people whose names we don't remember. We don't remember the Cheyenne worker who fabricated the first improved gun mounting bracket. We don't remember the Boeing engineer who calculated the exact traverse angles needed. We don't remember the MIT graduate student who helped Professor Draper test gyroscope mechanisms. We don't remember the Sperry technician who calibrated Mark 14 sights on the production line. We don't remember the Air Force intelligence officer who analyzed loss statistics and identified tailgun effectiveness as critical problem. We don't remember the maintenance sergeant in England who installed the first field modifications. We don't remember the test pilot who flew evaluation flights. We don't remember the procurement officer who authorized rapid deployment despite incomplete testing. We don't remember the logistics sergeant who distributed modification kits across England. We don't remember the armorer who adjusted sights for individual aircraft. We don't remember most of their names. The tailgunners who survived never met most of the essential piece. The connection remained invisible. Equipment designed by strangers, built by strangers, installed by strangers, enabled survival of users who never knew the builders' names. This invisible web of mutual dependence, spanning continents and connecting people who never meet each other, represents the true nature of modern technological warfare. Not individual heroism. Systematic competence involving thousands of contributors. The B-17 tailgunners who came home owed their survival to hundreds of people they never met. Engineers in Wyoming, professors in Massachusetts, workers in Seattle, mechanics in England, statisticians in Washington, an entire system of people all doing their jobs professionally, combining to create outcome greater than any individual contribution. That's the real story. That's the meaningful story. That's the story worth remembering. Because understanding how America actually won World War II through systematic excellence at massive scale rather than individual heroism teaches us what actually matters when nations mobilize for survival. October 14, 1943, Black Thursday, 60 bombers lost, 600 men dead or missing. The mathematics said the daylight bombing campaign would fail. 6 months later, March 1944, loss rates decreased to sustainable levels. The bombing campaign continued. The mathematics changed. What changed the mathematics? Engineering, statistical analysis identifying problems, systematic development of solutions, rapid testing and deployment, continuous improvement based on combat feedback, the Cheyenne tail, the reflector sight, the improved gun mounting. Each contributed incremental improvement. Combined, they doubled tail gunner hit rates from 8% to 15%. That doubling reduced tail attack losses by 35%. That reduction made approximately 15% contribution to overall loss rate improvement. That improvement made the difference between unsustainable and sustainable operations. 1,000 to 1,200 American lives saved, for $3.5 million invested, $2,900 per life saved. The return on investment extended beyond saved lives. Sustainable bombing campaign meant continued attacks on German war production, degraded German capability throughout 1944, contribution to Allied victory. The chain of causation runs from improved gun sights through changed hit rates, through reduced losses, through sustained bombing, through degraded enemy production, through ultimate victory. No individual hero, no dramatic rule breaking, just systematic engineering excellence deployed at scale. That's how America won. The tail gunners who came home never knew most of the engineers and workers who saved their lives. The connection remained invisible, but it was absolute. Every precisely fabricated component, every carefully calibrated sight, every systematically tested improvement. Each represented link in chain connecting builders to users, strangers separated by continents, but united by shared purpose. That shared purpose, that systematic cooperation of thousands of people who never met. That willingness to subordinate individual recognition to collective achievement, that represents America's decisive advantage in World War II. Not individual brilliance, systematic excellence at scale. The mathematics don't lie. The mathematics said 8% hit rates meant failure. The mathematics said 15% hit rates meant sustainability. Engineers changed the mathematics. Workers built the hardware. Crews proved it worked. The system succeeded. That's the lesson of October 14, 1943 and the B-17 tailgun improvements. Mathematics governs military outcomes. Engineering changes mathematics. Systematic competence at scale wins wars. The tail gunners who survived understood this instinctively, even if they couldn't articulate it precisely. They knew someone had given them better tools. They knew the better tools improved their survival chances. That knowledge was enough. For us studying this history decades later, the lesson should be clear. Celebrate systematic excellence. Recognize organizational competence. Understand that victory comes through professional execution of thousands of small tasks, not through dramatic individual heroism. The myth of Michael Romano simplifies. The reality of Cheyenne engineers, MIT professors, Boeing workers, and thousands of professional contributors tells truth. Truth is better than myth. Reality is more meaningful than fiction. The 1,000 to 1,200 tailgunners who came home because hit rates increased from 8 to 15%, they are the proof. Their survival was purchased not by individual genius, but by systematic excellence. That's the story. That's the truth. That's what October 14, 1943 teaches us.